So next I'll ask Alyssa Bierley to come up to the podium. Alyssa is a new member of Lawyers' Rights Watch, and she is the Colombia monitor for Lawyers' Rights Watch. She's also a lawyer at the Ontario College of Teachers, and in August she was part of a delegation along with Lawyers Without Borders Canada to Colombia, and she'll just give us a very brief statement on that. Thank you.
Okay, so as Kelly mentioned, I had the privilege of participating in a delegation of lawyers that went to Colombia in August of this past summer. There were 56 lawyers from 15 different countries that participated in the delegation over the course of 6 days. The countries that were represented, primarily the lawyers came from the UK, Canada, and the US, but we had people representing Peru, Brazil, Ireland, France, Germany, Ukraine, Spain, Japan, Netherlands, China, Argentina, and Mexico. So it was a very well-represented bunch. And it was organized in Canada by Lawyers Without Borders. So I went as a representative of both Lawyers Without Borders and Lawyers' Rights Watch Canada. So I'm just going to give you a really brief overview of kind of the themes and the issues that we encountered while we were there collectively, and then tell you a little bit about my personal experience in the region that I was sent to. Unfortunately, we're just in the early stages of putting together a report, so I don't have a lot of final kind of conclusions and recommendations to present today, but we're hoping that we will be launching the report in December or January, this coming December or January, and we'll have another session similar to this one today where we can go into greater detail about the report, and we're also hoping to have a launch similar to that, which Kara and the Mexican delegation are going to be having. Okay, so as I mentioned, it was 6 days in August in Colombia. We were organized into regional groups and were sent to 8 different regions. And during that time, we met with authorities, lawyers, victims groups, and when we returned to Bogota after spending time in the regions, at that time we met with the embassies, the UK, the US, and the Canadian embassies, and we also met with some national authorities, including the National Prosecution body, the Ombudsman, and we actually had an audience with the Vice President, which was pretty incredible. So. My experience was in Barranquilla and Cartagena, so that's in the Caribbean region of Bogota. Some of the themes and issues that came out when we all regrouped in Bogota and had a report back from all of our regions were very similar to some of the issues that Kara was just talking about. So in general, threats to lawyers, in particular lawyers who are defending criminals who are criminals who are kind of associated with any of the guerrilla groups in Colombia, or lawyers who are representing victims of state crimes. There are threats and, in some cases, assassination of those lawyers, so they're threatened not to take on particular cases. General access to justice issues seem to permeate the country. The machinations of the justice system tend to be very slow. There, like Kara was speaking about, there are very large caseloads and very few resources to deal with a lot of these cases. Procedural fairness seems to be a problem, particularly criminal defendants are not receiving adequate disclosure. There's not enough public defenders to serve these people. For human rights defenders specifically, there is just a general lack of support. The discourse surrounding human rights defenders in the country is very problematic. They're often, it's not unusual for politicians to speak out against human rights defenders and affiliate them with the causes that they're choosing to support. So that is, I think, a huge barrier to allowing human rights defenders to do their work effectively. They're often linked as well to the guerrilla groups that they are, in the cases where they are representing accused persons who are associated with the guerrilla groups, they're often lumped into that category as well. There are also some regionally specific issues of access to justice. So in the rural regions, there are lots of instances that we heard about of indigenous groups that are caught in the middle of kind of paramilitary and guerrilla group not to say crossfire, but the groups will kind of fight for control over territories, and the indigenous groups often get caught in the middle and are branded as having affiliated with one group versus another, when in actuality they're trying to remain neutral to the extent that one can. Also, there's a lot of indigenous people who are being displaced by multinational corporations who are, for the most part, engaging in resource extraction. And something else that we heard of was a lot of clear cutting of land to make room for African palms production. So all in all, we found that the main issue that continually kept coming up was the issue of the armed conflict in Colombia. The official government line is that there is no armed conflict, that it's over. It's been going on for 40 years, and the evidence that we heard in our meetings with people is that since the last caravana went to Colombia in 2008, the situation has actually gotten worse. So contrary to the fact that the government proclaims that this is over, it's far from over. And basically, there are guerrilla groups that had arisen about approximately, give or take, 40 years ago in response to the, by and large, unfair distribution of land in Colombia to essentially forcibly take that back. And when the military was seen by the landowners as not being effective in protecting their land, the paramilitary groups, comprised largely of these landowners and their kind of affiliates, arose to essentially take the law into their own hands. So over 40 years, this system has kind of become institutionalized, and it permeates all aspects of Colombian culture. So government within prisons, in communities, like I said, it catches indigenous groups, rural groups in the kind of crosshairs. So it's a very, very difficult issue to deal with, because any time you're dealing with an access to justice issue in Colombia, this bigger picture of the armed conflict certainly affects that. So just in terms of my experience in Barranquilla and Cartagena, which were the two cities that I visited in the Caribbean region, I'll just highlight a couple of the more, I guess, interesting and telling examples of issues that I heard about. So in Barranquilla, we spoke with, in both cities, we spoke to lawyers and victims groups. The victims group in Barranquilla told us some very disturbing stories of what a phenomena that they refer to as the false positives. I would say that in Spanish, but I would just butcher it. So the English translation is the false positives. And this is a situation where the government essentially, it's unclear whether this was a military or a government order, but in any case, the official bodies created a policy where there was essentially a bounty on the head of guerrilla groups, or rewards would be given to members of the military and paramilitary who brought in guerrillas, dead or alive. And so essentially 2,400 people were falsely killed and brought in what happened is they're often targeting community leaders who are kind of seen as agitators by paramilitary groups. They're dressed up in like guerrilla group clothing, whatever that looks like, I'm not sure. And then they're brought in and presented as a guerrilla group. So that has happened 2,400 times at the kind of minimum level. That's the official statistics. And from our understanding, from what the testimony that we heard from people, is that the perpetrators of that at the higher levels have all been extradited to the US. We're not clear why. That's something that we're hoping to kind of do a little bit more digging into as we're completing this report. But essentially, the victims groups were telling us that, not only has this horrible situation happened, but we can't even proceed with any sort of judicial process because these people are not even in the country to stand trial.